make sure we're on. Yeah, it's connecting. I think we're on. All right. Let me. Okay, here we go. All right. So, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
We're going to get started here. And I hope everybody had a good week. Yeah, I certainly did. Baruch Hashem, we're very busy. We're getting ready for Purim. Purim is going to happen tomorrow night. So if anybody wants to hear the Megillah, I have a board meeting. And okay, no worries. Then I got the message. Purim is starting tomorrow night, Thursday night at after sundown. We're going to have a minyan at 5 o'clock. And that's going to lead into the reading of the Megillah. It's a really big mitzvah to hear the story of Purim. And then on Friday morning at 8 o'clock, we're going to read the Megillah once again. So I hope you guys can all join us. And God willing, we'll have a beautiful, as they say in Yiddish, a freilichen Purim. It'll be a happy Purim. All right, we're going to get started with today's lesson because it's 11 o'clock, and that's the right thing to do. We got to get started at 11 o'clock. And as I mentioned last week, and I see Ted Roth is with us, and this particular course, Journey of the Soul, is in memory of Yaakov ben Tuvia Hanach, and may his neshama have an aliyah. And through our learning, may his soul be blessed, and in return, his neshama will bless his family and all of us here today. So we are going to begin our lesson number 3. And the title of today's lesson is The Morning After, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G, after. All right, grief and consolation. So that's what we're going to talk about. But before we get started, I always like to make my little joke to get everybody sort of in the mood and in the spirit of learning, something a little lighthearted, because we're speaking about lots of heavy stuff. So I like to make my little joke. This is actually, oh, hold on. Who cannot hear? 1 second. Yeah, hi, Ron. Yes, go to jewishpv.com/Zoom. And then do you see the three, the choice of JLI? .com/Zoom. No. jewishpv.com/. That means, it's by the question mark, and then Zoom, and that'll take you, and you'll see the choice for JLI. Choose that. Yeah, no worries. Okay. Well, that's the world of Zoom. People are trying to log in. So I want to remind everybody, the easiest way to log in is you go to Jewish PV. Okay, so first of all, I see Ted. Can you hear me, Ted, now?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, can everybody hear me?
My volume is somehow set to 0.
Okay, perfect. I want to make sure everybody hears me. Okay, so I'm going to mute everybody for right now. If there's any issue, just send a nice little text here, and I'll try to resolve it. Let me just do one more thing for Ron Pillar. I hope he's going to be able to find the lesson. Hold on. This is what I'm going to do for Ron Pillar. So it looks like he's not. Let me 2 seconds here. All right. Yeah, that's why we got to do this. That was the whole idea of doing it 20 minutes before the class. So that, okay. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so we're going to start by, I want to share my little joke, the joke for the day. So there was a guy, I don't know, let's call him Larry. So Larry passed away, and his wife, Sarah, decided that she's going to call the local newspaper and she was going to put an ad. So the guy says, you want to put an ad in? For $25, you can put 6 words in the ad, in the obituary section. And anyhow, so she says, I want you to print, Larry is dead. So the guy says, the newspaper guy says, well, you have 6 words you can say. So she says, okay, then print, Larry is dead, Lexus for sale. All right, that's my little joke for today. So you have to have some lightheartedness when you're learning very, very serious business about life. Okay, that's my little joke. I got that out of the way. It looks like we got everybody back into the class, Baruch Hashem, and everybody looks like they're settled in their seats, comfortable, and we're ready to roll. Okay, obviously, death is inevitable. Taxes are inevitable. It's going to happen, whether we like it or not. And the experience of loss in general, by all people, it doesn't matter who it is always felt, right? That experience is felt by the people that are left behind. So somebody passes away, and the survivors, the people who are close, the loved ones, they're the ones who are left to sort of carry the bag. And we see that there is different kinds of experiences, and it varies from one individual to the next individual. So in the past 2 lessons, when we were learning philosophically about the soul, and we're learning about what happens to the soul, and we learned how the soul wants to return to the body and it wants to go home, all of those ideas that we learned were more theoretical, theological, they were a little bit detached, maybe a little bit mechanical. It's sort of outside of ourselves. It's not very personal. All the ideas that we studied were not very personal. So today we are going to turn to study more about the practical reality of death and the gaping hole that it leaves in every single person. There's no one who doesn't have some kind of a hole that's left in their lives, in their hearts. So hopefully the information that we're going to learn today in today's lesson will ultimately allow us to be able to better cope with the pain that we experience at the loss of a loved one. So today we're going to speak more about practical things versus theoretical things. Okay, so we're going to begin the class with 2 stories. There are two true stories about 2 different experiences of loss of life, people who have lost loved ones. And what we will see from these 2 stories is that these 2 people had 2 different experiences and 2 different kinds of circumstances. And what that really tells us is that whenever there is loss in somebody's life, it's very difficult. It's actually, that's not difficult. People do it actually. You could really not compare one person's pain to someone else's pain because we're all different and we process our grief and our pain and our mourning in various different ways. Plus, no 2 circumstances is the same. Every person's story is a different story. We have a whole different story. So here we go. Text number 1, page number 84. I'm going to read it for you. Here it goes. Heather Lindquist was in the kitchen cleaning up after lunch when she heard a dull thud. It sounded as if it came from the hallway, and it was just a little too loud to be ignored. Boys, she yelled, what are you up to? There was no answer. She found her 2 boys playing quietly on the couch in the living room. They giggled. You jokers, she said with a smile. What was the sound? They shrugged. Where is your father? Without waiting for an answer, she ran toward the hallway. She cried out in fear when she found her husband, John, writhing on the floor. John had a severe asthma. He was taking a new medication, and it seemed to be working. But suddenly, he had collapsed in the worst attack he'd ever had. Heather tried everything she could think of to save her husband's life. Then she called an ambulance. The rest was a blur. John died of cardiac arrest on the way to the hospital. Heather was 34 years old. Her boys were 5 and 7. At that moment, John's death felt like the worst thing that could ever happen to her. Heather Lindquist had lived her entire life in the same quiet suburban community in northern New Jersey. She and John had been school sweethearts. They married and purchased a small ranch-style house. They had children. They got a dog. The schools were good and the community was stable. Heather thought that the television was on more than it should be, but other than that, everything seemed in order. Then John died, and she had to rethink it all. Now she was a single parent. She had to find new ways to earn money and also to find extra time to be with her boys. And somehow she had to contain everyone's anguish. She found strength she didn't know she had. It was lonely and painful at times, but Heather found meaning and vigor and even joy in the idea that she was going to make it. I expected to collapse. I really did. That's what I wanted to do. That would have been the easiest thing to do, Heather explained. But I couldn't. Each day I got up and did what I had to do. The days passed and somehow it was okay. The boys were great. They were upset in the beginning, of course. We all were. They hung in there and we stayed together. I love those boys so much. John would have been proud of them. So that's story number one. It has, I don't know if it's a happy ending, but certainly she was able to find some sort of balance in her life. She was able to bring some normalcy back into her family's life. All right, let's go to story number two. This is titled Overwhelmed by Grief. So it's a different kind of a story. In 2004, Stephanie Moldenberg of Short Hills, New Jersey, looks like everybody is dying in New Jersey, lost her son, Eric, 13, to Ewing's sarcoma, a bone cancer. 4 years after Eric's death, Miss Moldenberg, now 48, walked around like a zombie. I felt guilty all the time, guilty about living, she said. I couldn't walk into the deli because Eric couldn't go there any longer. I couldn't play golf because Eric couldn't play golf. My life was a mess. And I couldn't talk to my friends about it because after a while, they didn't want to hear about it. Stephanie, you need to get your life back, they'd say. But how could I? Oh, birthdays. On birthdays, I'd shut the door and take the phone off the hook. Eric couldn't have any more birthdays. Why should I? Okay. You know, with these two stories, the point of these two stories, we can sit and analyze them till we're blue in the face, and that's true. But we have a lot of stuff to unpack in this class. I don't want to really go through a whole analytical session of trying to analyze the two. But what we see here for sure is you have two different people who have two different experiences, and they express their experiences in very different ways. One is able to get out of it with her children, and the second one, which was Heather, I believe, in the second story, it was Stephanie. Stephanie was not able to get out of her grief and her mourning. And of course, one lost a husband and one lost a son. Losing a child is probably, in the scheme of life, one of the most painful things that any human being can ever go through. So it's very, very painful. I just read a story yesterday online, an interesting story, sad story. I almost had tears in my eyes. A young couple who had just given birth to twins. It was a very difficult pregnancy, and she made it through, and the twins were healthy, and everything was great. This happened in England. Their little daughter, who was about 7 years old, went to play at her friend's house. Somehow she was climbing some tree house or something like that. She was wearing a helmet, and the helmet got caught somewhere in the tree, and she hung herself, sadly, and the kid died. And it's interesting that the mother's reaction was that if not for the twins, I would have killed myself. I mean, she knows she has to take care of her children. Otherwise, she had no reason to live. There was no motivation for her to continue to live on. So what these stories really tell us is something very important and very powerful, that at the end of the day, there's no two experiences that are the same, and there's no two circumstances that are the same. So how we deal with grief is really very different. It varies. And I've seen it as a rabbi, going to people's homes, meeting with them and speaking to them. And there's all kinds of ways that people deal with grief. And you cannot compare and say, well, they're not crying too much or they're crying too little. You really can't do that type of stuff. I want to switch gears just for a moment to make an interesting comparison, because sometimes when you do make certain comparisons of anything in life, it helps you to gain better context and a better perspective. So we have been arguing that in Judaism, that this life is precious. Being in this world, even though the soul wants to go to the next world, and the next world is the right place for where our essence, our soul belongs, nevertheless, the place for the soul to accomplish its mission is right here in this world, which tells us that the soul has great value being here in this world. And that in and of itself, which we'll touch upon a little later on, has great value. And there is sadness that the soul can no longer fulfill a mission in this world. But if you look at 2,000 years ago, you look at the Greek philosophers. The Greek philosophers like Socrates, Aristotle, and Plato, all of those great philosophers had a much different view about living in this world. They did not see any great value of living your life here. In fact, they argued that a person can unshackle themselves from all of the limitations of the human experience in this world, because other people dictate what happens to you in your life. So you don't have as much control as you think. But once you die, you're free to go wherever you're supposed to go. I'm not sure they believed in a soul. I don't think so, because they were pagans. They believed in idol worship. So I'm not exactly sure what they believed in terms of the afterlife. But one thing I can tell you for sure is that they certainly did not see any value in living in this world. There was no point in living in this world. And that's why when someone died, they just shrugged their shoulders. It was no big deal. That's the way Socrates saw life. Let's read a little bit this is actually from Plato. Plato records this. Now, Socrates, if you don't know, was arrested because he was infiltrating the minds of the Greek youth. And, he was teaching them and influencing them with what they considered at that time crazy ideas, and they were unhappy about it. And therefore, they imprisoned him, they tried him, and they convicted him, and they sentenced him to death. He's going to die. While he was incarcerated, he was visited by various different students. And one of the students, Phoebo, he transmitted his conversation to Plato, and Plato recorded this conversation. And all this point is to contrast Jewish values regarding mourning and having grief and pain when someone dies versus the Greek philosophers. Here it goes. Text number 3. Socrates instructed, Cebes, please relate the following message to Evenus and bid him be of a good cheer. Say that I would have him come after me. By the way, he means to die after him, by immediately leaving this world. If he be a wise man and not tarry, and that today I am likely to be going, for the Athenians say that I must. I want to say that he had opportunity to escape, and he didn't, because he just didn't see any purpose or what the benefits were to escape. Just to live a life where your life is shackled by other people, he didn't want that kind of life. So he was happy to leave this world. All right, let's continue. Simmias said, what a message for such a man. Having been a frequent companion of his, I should say that as far as I know him, he will never take your advice unless he is obliged. Why, said Socrates, is not Evenus a philosopher? Meaning that philosophers believed that death was actually freeing a person. I think that he is, said Simmias. Then he, or any man who has the spirit of philosophy, will be willing to die, but he will not take his own life, for that is held to be unlawful. The day may come when you will understand why, though a man is better dead, he is not permitted to be his own benefactor, but must wait for the hand of another. So Socrates basically does not see any point in living your life here when your life is contingent upon the whims of other people's control over you. So this is a stark contrast between Judaism, the traditions of Judaism, where in Yiddishkeit we advocate for a person to mourn, for a person to actually feel the pain of the loss of a loved one. So believe it or not, it's interesting that today, perhaps we mourn and we are saddened by somebody's death, is because those values were taught to us by the Torah, by Judeo values. All right, so now let's see, what does Judaism say about the idea of mourning and death? So here it goes. Text number 4, and this is a quote from Maimonides, who basically makes the claim, which is true, that the idea of mourning of a loved one is biblical. That means the Torah wants us to do this. So here's what Maimonides says. We are biblically commanded to mourn the deaths of our next of kin. All right? So now, even though we intellectually know that the soul is returning home to a universe of truth, and that's what we've been learning for the past few weeks, that the soul is going back home, the Torah also acknowledges our reality, that when a loved one passes away, there remains a void in our life, a physical void in our life. So the Torah does not want to disturb the natural order of life. It does not want to suppress our pain. It wants to help us in a balanced and in a natural way to be able to go through the process of grieving and mourning and to come to a place where a person could live their life in a harmonious state after the loss of a loved one. So the physical absence creates feelings of sadness and pain. So the Torah would never impose on us to avoid mourning and grieving. So it actually allows us to do that. There is a interesting quote from Nachmanides, which we're going to learn, right? We're going to read right now on text number 5a on page 89. Nachmanides makes the claim on a basic level. He says the whole idea of mourning basically is to satisfy the natural order of humanity, that you lose a loved one, and what's the natural order? Is to mourn, is to grieve. You're in pain. So of course you should mourn. So he says the Torah recognizes this fact, this natural phenomenon. Text number 5a, page 89. The Torah does not forbid us to weep in response to a death, because it is human nature to be moved to tears when separating from loved ones and they're journeying away, even if they are alive. So he's adding, even if you're alive, people, at airports, when they part from one another, they cry. So the idea that people part from one another creates sadness within oneself. So the Ramban, Nachmanides, this is not Maimonides, Nachmanides, he lived about 100 years after Maimonides. He is just saying that the Torah is not going to suppress us from having the ability to be able to mourn and grieve for a loved one. Maimonides adds to this point. So this is Maimonides, who lived earlier. He adds to the point and says, not only is it because we want to be able to acknowledge our natural pain, but he makes the argument, and it's true, it's corroborated in psychological studies, that a person who mourns properly gets therapeutic benefits from that mourning. It's helpful. It makes you a better person. It helps you to understand what the meaning of the loss is and how to go on in a person's life. Let's read text number 5b, page 90. Here's what Maimonides says. Mourners find comfort in crying and in arousing their sorrow until their bodies are too weak to handle the intensity of their internal turmoil, just as happy individuals find contentment in various forms of light-hearted activities. So clearly, Maimonides adds to what Nachmanides is saying, and he is really talking about the benefits that one gets from mourning, if done properly. We're going to talk about that in a few moments. But there's something more powerful when we speak about the idea of mourning. The idea of mourning actually expresses a Jewish theological truth. And what is that Jewish theological truth? The theological truth is that the soul has an important mission in this world. If we are pained and we are saddened by the loss of a loved one, we're expressing our Jewish theological truth that there's a special mission and a special importance for the soul to be on this universe. And that's the part that we miss. So that's what the tears might be all about, or at least partially what it's all about. So there's the natural phenomenon, there's the idea that we benefit from it in a psychological way, but also we are expressing a beautiful truth, a Jewish truth, through our grieving and mourning. Let's read this reading on page 91. It's text number 5c. This was written by the Radvaz. The Radvaz lived in Spain. We actually quoted him in our first lesson. he spoke about in our first lesson about the idea that he was astonished to find that the Muslims did not grieve that much because they didn't assign so much importance for life in this world. They said the soul goes up to heaven and that's the most important thing. This reading that we're going to read today mirrors that idea as well. Let's read. By the way, the type of scholarship he had was where people would ask him scholarly questions and he would respond to them and use the sources of the Torah and scholarship to resolve many different questions that people had in his days. Here's the question. One of this generation's greatest personalities failed to shed a single tear upon losing his son. Is this a praiseworthy reaction? It seems like somebody famous, it doesn't say who it is, lost a son, and there was no reaction. People didn't see any tears from this guy. So they wanted to know, is this guy like a really strong person? Is this person praiseworthy? Should we actually emulate this kind of behavior? Is this something better than when we do mourn? So here's what the Radvaz answers. He says, such behavior is offensive and objectionable. It demonstrates heartlessness, distasteful character, and cruelty. This is the way of the philosophers, we just studied about the philosophers before, who maintain that this world is without purpose. By contrast, we who have received the Torah are expected to believe and to realize that this world is of a great value. For those who properly utilize their time here and behave appropriately, it is through our actions in this world that we merit the world to come. Crying, mourning, and shedding tears over a passing of a loved one, and especially of an honorable individual, is the way of the pious, the prophets, and individuals renowned for their good deeds. It is not for naught that our sages instructed us to observe 3 days of weeping, 7 for eulogies, and 34 restrictions on wearing our new clothing and getting haircuts, etc. If weeping were improper, the sages would not have instituted a 3-day weeping period. In fact, the Torah emphasizes that our forefather, Abraham, came to eulogize Sarah and weep for her, and Jacob and King David and countless individuals of similar caliber acted likewise. The Radvaz is expressing a Jewish theological truth, and that is that we are here in this world to fulfill a mission and accomplish something that God sent us here for, and that's why the soul is here. So when we cry about and mourn the loss of a loved one, we are also expressing that truth, that the person had a unique mission and a unique mission from God in this world. So those are the 3 ideas that we see that the Torah clearly advocates, the idea of mourning. And this is really to contrast everything that we studied about the Greek philosophers. Okay, so now that we understand that we're supposed to mourn, all right, or why we mourn, so the question now becomes, who do we mourn for? On Monday, I received a call from a young woman in our community, and she had an aunt who passed away on Shabbat, last week Shabbat. She's a niece, and that aunt never had any children, so she felt like she was her aunt's child. She felt like a child to her. And she was asking me questions about practice. What am I supposed to do for my aunt in terms of mourning? And I basically told her, being that she's a niece, she has no Jewish obligations to do any of the traditional rituals of mourning. Now, of course, she can light a candle if she chooses to do so. Certainly she was in tears. I would never stop her from crying. That would be a terrible thing for me to do that. But nevertheless, when it comes to 6 specific close relatives, those are the only people that we do the traditional ritualistic mourning for. So those include Shiva. I'll tell you what we do in a moment. But who are these people? A father, a mother, a sibling, so a brother or sister, a spouse, a son, and a daughter. Those are the 6 people that we do the traditional Shiva and other things, which I'm going to mention right now. Now, what do we actually do when any of those 6 people pass away? So let me talk about first what the different phases that you find yourself in. So the first thing is that a person finds themselves As soon as they find out that someone passed away, someone that was close to them, any of the 6 people that we mentioned earlier, in almost all cases, I say almost because there's always an exception, it's a devastating piece of news. People are devastated, even if it's expected. It's the part of life where it's a very difficult point in life. And because at this moment, the person is in an intense state of mourning, so it's important for people who are there with them to be there just for them, meaning you don't have to console them. There's nothing you could say at that moment. There are no words that would console the person. The best you can do is just be there for them. And if they don't want you there, then they don't want you there. So it's called aninut in Hebrew. Also, men who put on tefillin every day and certain mitzvot, we do not do it on that day. So you don't put on your talit, you don't put on your tefillin on that day. Why? Because talit and tefillin, one has to have be fully invested in the mitzvah. When you're in that state of sadness, it's very extreme, and there's no way that a person can be focused in any form or shape when it comes to doing those kind of mitzvot. Then, after the person is buried, we have what's called Shiva. That is the 7 days where people come to visit in the person's home. We'll learn about this a little later on. Then you have Shloshim. So once the 7 days are over, you wait for 30 days, and the 30 days ends at 30 days from when the person passed away, not 30 days from when you got up from the Shiva. You count 30 days from the day that the person passed away. And these days, for 30 days, you refrain from buying new clothing. We don't get a haircut, men don't shave, and you don't go particularly to any big festivities, weddings or bar mitzvahs. You try to be focused and more in tune with the loss of your loved one. And then you have, of course, the 12 months. The 12 months period, by the time you reach that 12-month point, a person should, by that time, be more, I should say, the pain should have subsided, although the void would never, ever go away completely. So we have that 12-month period. And finally, we have the yearly yard cycle. We light a candle and we say the Kaddish. Those are the phases, the stages of mourning. And the whole idea is to get from that first stage to the last stage and come out of it in a wholesome way, and God forbid not to fall into a state of depression. Okay? Now, last week, I believe it was, Victor Ross, I think he was learning with us at night. And he mentioned something very interesting, that there are studies, psychological studies that show and indicate that the practice of mourning, the aninut, the 3 days, the 7 days, the 30 days, the 12 months, corroborate with scientific studies or psychological studies, for mental health, where it corroborates this. Today we have a whole other study that, we can do it, and it's a whole analyzation, but it's going to take away from the Jewish part of this class, which is what I'm here to do. But let me just say this. This study is addressed the idea of emotional well-being after a loved one passes away. There's a doctor, his name is Dr. Simone Shimshon Rubin, and I think it might be a woman, I'm not sure. The person wrote a book called The 2-Track Model of Bereavement. And those 2 tracks mirror one another. It's the Jewish way of mourning versus the psychological way of dealing with a loss of loved one. It's a whole study. So we're gonna skip all of those figures. It's just gonna take too much time, and yesterday we barely had time to finish up all of the other ideas. But the point of it is that what we are speaking about today, the traditions that are thousands of years old, have corroboration in our modern day. That's a wonderful thing. It feels good, at least, when a person is invested in anything of life and you have corroboration from somewhere, from the outside, from a non-partisan idea, then that feels good. So it is a good thing when we talk about in Jewish life to do these different stages of mourning. Okay, so I want to talk about something very, very important, because there are various different stages of mourning, as I explained earlier. And our job as human beings, if God forbid we fall into this category where we lost a loved one, we have to remember that one of the first responses by most people, right? One of the first responses, I can't say in everybody, that would probably not be a fair statement, but I would go on a limb and say most people are in denial at first. There's a denial. There's a sense like, this can't be, maybe it didn't happen, so on and so forth. A denial that the person passed away. So the person's not living in reality. Now, there's all different levels of non-reality, especially when a person loses a child or somebody that's very young. It's like, it's not believable. The person's 90 years old, 100 years old, it becomes more believable. But in principle, there is always a sense of denial where you just can't believe it. And people use the word, I can't believe it. The word, when I express myself and I say, I can't believe it, I'm really saying I might be in a level of denial. It might be a low level of denial, but you are in denial. So what does a person have to do to counter the denial? You have to accept the full implication of the loss. You have to accept that. Because if you don't accept the full implication of the loss, how do you begin the Shiva? How do you get to 30 days? How do you get to 12 months? How do you get to 10 years down the line? You must have a process where you accept it fully and wholeheartedly. So what is the first thing that a person is supposed to do when they hear about the news of the passing of a loved one? Does anybody know what the first thing is supposed to do? What are we supposed to do? This is something that I think most people don't know. Jackie, what are we supposed to do?
Shema.
Shema. Interesting. By the way, there are people who do that. Call the funeral home.
Or tear your garment.
All right. After you've said the Shema, you've called the funeral home, you called the rabbi. All right. So what you do is you call me.
You tear your
I like my day job. Anyhow, so what they do is, in Hebrew, it's called kriya. They tear their garment. Okay? I'm sure you've seen at funerals where they'll bring a black pin, like what is it? Like a ribbon, and then you rip it. That is not the correct way to do it, but that's the idea. It comes from that idea. And we do it right away. When you rip your garment, what are you in essence doing? You're destroying your garment, meaning that this garment is now dead. Okay? You're no longer going to use it. The physical action of ripping the garment, by the way, you don't have to rip it all the way. You rip it about 2 inches or so. The ripping of it is a physical, tangible way for the person to connect with the reality of what is going on, the loss of a loved one. It's called kriya. Does anybody know in the Torah, the first recording of a character in the Torah who actually tears his garment, renders his garment? It's the story of Jacob. Did you want to say? Yeah, Jacob. You remember the story when Joseph was sold by the brothers? So he's alive. But in order for the father to think he's dead, what did they do? They dipped his coat that his father gave him. It was like a special coat. They dipped it in the blood of the goat, right? They slaughtered a goat. And they came up and they said, your son was killed, I don't know, by a wild animal. If that happened today, you take DNA. Wouldn't be too hard to figure it out. But what is Jacob's first reaction? Jacob rents his garments. So that's what text number 6 is. I'm going to skip it for right now because that's pretty much I paraphrased the verse. So tearing one's clothes counters the common response of denial. That is the purpose, or one. I shouldn't say it's the only purpose, but it's one of the important things that a person does to counter any sense that a person might be in denial of the passing of a loved one. Let's read text number 7 because this expresses it even more. Here we go. Text number 7, page number 98. Rabbi Yaakov Chagitz states that mourners are instructed to render their garments as a method of distracting from and reducing their overwhelming grief. In my humble opinion, the opposite is true. Having to rend their garments brings mourners to tears and amplifies their pain. The goal is to actively encourage mourners to express their pain over the passing and to experience the tremendous loss. So here he is confirming that the reason we tear the garment is to create a sense of reality so you can begin the process of healing going forward after the funeral, 3 days, 7 days, 30 days, 12 days, and yard sites every year. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about mourning and finding comfort. How do we find that comfort? So, mourning is, of course, is natural. That's what we explained earlier, and it is a mitzvah. So, if you didn't have the mitzvah, you'd still do it anyhow. There's no sin in it. It's encouraged. It's a biblical commandment, by the way, to mourn. Not fake mourning, but real mourning. Ultimately, we aren't meant to remain in this state of mourning, and one needs to, at some point, return back to normal life. And God forbid, we don't want to find somebody, 6 months down the road, a year down the road, and find themselves in the therapist's office, looking for solace and figuring out how to, get rid of the depression that a person finds themselves. I want to just make an important point. Everything that we're talking about is in addition, if somebody is, getting, psychological help for their mental well-being, for the loss. People go to, different groups for bereavement groups. Those are good. We're not saying that Judaism is the only way. Our process is it and nothing else works. And that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that this, in addition, if somebody needs outside help, is very, very helpful. That's what I want to make sure people understand. So I don't want anybody to think that we're advocating not to go anywhere else. This is an addition. So what we clearly see from this past text is that while the Torah compassionately validates and encourages mourning, it is also very insistent that we get when the proper time comes, we need to move to normal life. The Torah wants us to get back to our normal lives. Now, obviously, everybody mourns in a very different way. Some more, some less, some feel it in one way, some feel it in another way, the circumstances, all of this stuff I mentioned earlier. Bottom line is that Jewish tradition maintains that extended mourning is not what God wants from us. Okay, let's read text number 8. And here is what the Talmud tells us and warns us about not mourning for too long. Here it goes. Page 99. Neither cry for the dead nor bemoan him. This is obviously a verse from Jeremiah. And it sounds like, well, we shouldn't mourn somebody. This is the opposite of what we're learning. But the Talmud interprets that. Neither cry for the dead. What does that mean? More than necessary. Nor bemoan him more than what is prescribed. How are we expected to act? 3 days for weeping, 7 days for eulogies, and 30 days for restrictions on new clothing and haircuts. Once these have elapsed, God declares, you are not more compassionate than I. So, we have to move on at some point. And that's the whole point of this, is that a person cannot remain in a state of grieving for the rest of their lives. Now, obviously, it's impossible to completely, and it would be wrong, by the way, to say, I don't want to have any feelings of, pain or grief for the loss of a loved one. But at the same time, one has to have the balance of life. If 75% of your day is inundated with thoughts of your loved one, and that creates depression, you got a problem. If 10% of your day is involved in thinking about a loved one, then that might be a healthier kind of a person. All right, now, so we're talking about different kinds of people. And, lots of people go forward and get on with their lives. We read the 2 stories earlier, the first woman, it seemed like Heather, was able to get on with her life, create stability for her children. But what if, like the Stephanie lady, if one finds themselves that they are still having a hard time with pain and loss? It's lingering. It's just not going away. So one needs to focus their energies on moving on. You have to keep moving on, but you're stuck. How do you get to the next stage? And how do you get back to normal life? So I want to talk about a few ideas. First, let me talk about 3 ideas that we've learned in the past, and then we're going to add 2 more ideas. again, I want to remind everybody, these ideas are in addition to getting help from a bereavement group or from a therapist or a psychologist, whatever it might be. So this is only in addition. So, and it's true, because if a person is able to meditate on these things way before the loss of a loved one, you could be, there's no such thing as being fully prepared, but you can be semi-prepared with ideas that are within yourself. You own these ideas. They're Jewish ideas. They're truthful ideas. It can help a person in the process of healing. Here are a few ideas that I want to share with you. 3 ideas that we've already learned in the past lessons. First of all, the neshama is eternal. Okay? So when we say the person is gone, the person is not gone. Okay? So the fact that the soul is eternal means that only the body has died off, but the person is still around. The essence of the person lives on. The second thing is that our relationship continues with the deceased. We still can have a relationship with them because they have a soul. The third idea that we've been learning in the past 3 weeks is that at the end of the day, where does the soul ultimately enjoy being? In this world or in the upper world? Here it's only about mission. So it's got something to do, but it doesn't like this world. This world is too vain for it. It's too coarse for it. It's not the world it wants to be in. It wants to be in the world of heaven, in the presence of godliness. So it's in a good place. So there is a place to say in Judaism. I don't like the word when people say they're in a better place. It's true they're in a better place, because that means don't say it right away. When people say it immediately, they're in a better place, I don't know. I'm a little ambivalent about using that terminology. It's a true statement, but it takes away from the grief in the beginning. Right. So I don't know if I like to say that. No, I've heard people losing children who have said it. Yeah, but it's not what I'm trying to bring out. The point is that there are methods, including the 3 things that I just mentioned earlier, just now. I want to add two more important ideas. And what do they say? There are no atheists in a foxhole. Am I right? No atheists in a foxhole. I've seen that too many times in my life, and as a rabbi, there are no atheists in a foxhole. It's true. So here's 2 ideas to think about. And it's along the same lines that we've been speaking in the past few weeks. So the first thing is, at the end of the day, where does a person find the most solace, the most comfort in life? When you're struggling and nobody can help you, illness specifically, no doctor can cure you. You ran into financial troubles and you're in a real bad place. Or I visit, before COVID and hopefully afterwards, I visit the local prison in Terminal Island, and you're stuck behind bars. It's an awful place to be. You have no power whatsoever in your life. Where does a person find comfort? What do you look to? Where's the comfort of life? Anybody? God. Very good. That was Rob. He's going to get an extra gold sticker on his forehead before you leave. No, he got the answer right. The bride is right. Anyhow, so the idea that God is the ultimate comforter is something to be not only looked at, but it's something that's a very serious thing. And here's an interesting point. When we visit somebody at Shiva, what do we say? Obviously people are saying words of consolation. They're saying anecdotes and praising and, the loved one. But as a rabbi, I always lead people in a declaration of comfort. And what is that declaration? We say the words Hamakom Yinachem Etchem B'toch Sha'ar Avei Tzion B'Yerushalayim. What does that mean in Hebrew? In English? Mimi? You let me do it. Okay. Mimi says I should do it. May the omnipresent God console you along the other mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. It's a very weird declaration. Number one, we use the word makom for God. The word makom means place. Why are we calling God? Why don't we just say Adonai, God? What's with the word Hashem? What's with the word hamakom? There's other ways to call God. What does the word makom mean? It means a place, which means that God is so transcendent, we can't comprehend him. But there's parts of God that we could comprehend. in our limited little world of time and space, our universe of time and space, we could comprehend God. So when we talk about God comforting us, it's the makom part of God. The part of God that's in the world of limitations. He's not limited, but he comes, lowers himself to our world to bring us comfort. That's why we say hamakom. You understand that point? It's a beautiful point, because God is here to comfort us. So what's the first message that we give to the mourner? That ultimately the ability to find comfort comes from God. And this goes for everything in life, God himself. And it's true. People in all different situations of life, in most cases, they turn to Hashem, they turn to God. It's a very interesting idea. Okay, that's the first thing. But let's look at the second part of the, it's text number 9a, page 100. May the omnipresent God console you along with the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. You know, when you go to a mourner and you're consoling them, you know, would it be nice for you to compare their loss to 9/11? Do you think that that's an appropriate thing to say? You know, let's talk about 9/11, all those people that lost their loved ones. It was an awful time in America or the world. Is that appropriate to start talking about the 9/11? Absolutely not. It's a horrible time. It's terrible what happened in 9/11. You know what we're saying here? We're saying the Jewish 9/11 is connected to your mourning. We're saying, may you be comforted amongst the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. That's like saying, may you be comforted amongst the mourners of 9/11. That's ridiculous to invoke a tragedy. By all accounts, it's one of the biggest tragedies, the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, and millions of people got killed. Terrible time for the Jewish people. But it's no longer a personal thing. It's not, you're not saying anything, you're not saying much to the person. You're taking away, you're delegitimizing perhaps the loss of that loved one. You're lumping it with a piece of history. So here is the understanding of what the meaning when we say Hamakom Yenachem Etchem B'Tor Shar Avelit Zion V'Yerushalayim. Why do we invoke Zion and Jerusalem? I know you don't know. That's why I'm here today. Jackie is saying it's baffling. Okay. And I'm here to help everybody understand, guide you through this. So the Rebbe has a beautiful explanation for this. When the Romans destroyed the temple and Jerusalem, what did they destroy? Stones, materialistic objects. That's all they destroyed. Did they destroy the spirit of the Jew? Not at all. Did they destroy the God of the Jewish people? Not at all. Did they destroy the spirit of the Torah? Not at all. All they did was they destroyed rocks and bricks and gold and silver, inanimate objects. That's all they were able to do. That's it they accomplished. We are sitting here today, right? We are living on today. The spirit of the Torah lives on. The spirit of the temple lives on. We don't have a temple, but if you go to any shul, a synagogue, it's the I don't want to use the replacement because it's not the replacement, but it emulates what the temple was all about. That's why we have an ark with a Torah in it. So we are here. The spirit lives on. The stones are not there. So that is a message. We're not saying and comparing your loss with the loss of Jerusalem and Zion. We're saying that your loss of your loved one is only a bodily loss, a physical loss. But we're saying something powerful to them. The idea that we've been expressing pretty much for the last 3 weeks, that the soul lives on. The spirit of the person stays with you and will be in your household, will be in your life, in your children, in your grandchildren, and for all eternity, they will live on. So the whole statement of comforting amongst the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem is to remind the mourner that the spirit of their loved one lives on for all eternity. And that might be comforting to the person. All right. Right. So see that idea that only stones were destroyed and And the body is an inanimate object, and it's not who we are. The first lesson we said, who are we? We are our souls. The essence of us is our souls. All right. So rendering of our clothing is the beginning of that reality. And it also offers this partial solace to tell us that we're ripping the garment, meaning that the garment is gone, but the soul still lives on. That's what text number 10 is all about. Let me read text number 10. Page 102. Often within their pain, the mourners have an underlying belief that it isn't true that their loved one hasn't really gone. This is not just denial. In a way, they are right. Death is not an absolute reality. Our souls existed before we were born, and they continue to exist after we die. The souls that have passed on are still with us. We can't see them, but we sense they are there. We can't hear them, but we know that they hear us. On the surface, we are apart. Beyond the surface, nothing can separate us. So we tear our garments. This has a dual symbolism. We are recognizing the loss, that our hearts are torn, so it brings us back to reality. But ultimately, the body is also only a garment that the soul wears. Death is when we strip off the uniform and take on another. The garment may be torn, but the essence of the person within it is still intact. From our worldly perspective, death is indeed a tragedy, and the sorrow experienced by the mourners is real, but as they tear their garments, we hope that within their pain, they can sense a glimmer of deeper truth that souls never die. So in the ripping, and when ripping the garment, and when we tell people you're mourning, you're being comforted like Zion and Jerusalem, the meaning of those things is that there's continuity to the soul of the person. The person continues to live on. All right, let's shift gears for a moment here. Let's talk about healing, or healing truths. In an ideal situation, a person going through the process of mourning, will with time find inner strength and peace and continue to living a happy and healthy life. It's amazing how God really instills in every one of us resilience, a tremendous amounts of resiliency, especially children. Believe it or not, children can cope with this. I'm not saying that they don't need to be, they don't need to be observed and be taken care of. They'll need the help that they can get, but they have the wherewithal, the power, the resilience to be able to overcome the loss of a loved one. But yet we find that that at times life, in the case of Stephanie, for example, people who experience loss don't see the possibility of being able to move on. But the Torah does want us to live a happy life. They live happily ever after, that kind of thing. So let's see what Jewish tradition tells us about when a person who is stuck and can't seem to get out of mourning and grief. Let's see what happens. Okay? So let's first talk a little bit about the idea of pain. So everybody knows from experience that when you hear about the loss of a loved one, and even someone who's not an immediate family member, as we mentioned earlier, the 6 categories, but you feel pain. So when we speak about pain after the loss of a loved one, the word pain is a general term. Can anybody give a more specific definition when we say pain for the loss of a loved one? What specifically are we talking about? It could be a lot of things, but I want to talk about 2 ideas. Psychological pain. Okay, what else? Any other ideas? Erica, you want to say something?
I want to say the word that it's frightening to think that your life will continue without that person.
Yes, a person is afraid. Okay.
I think also it can feel like it can feel almost like a physical pain. You wake up in the morning and you kind of forget, and then the reality hits you. It can feel like a physical pain.
Yeah, people they can't work, they can't function, they physically feel sick. All right, so let's talk about 2 emotional pains that are there's more, there's a lot, but we're just going to limit it of time here. There's two pains that we most people generally feel when they lose a loved one. One is anger, and the other one is guilt. Those are two very, very common feelings of pain when a person loses a loved one: anger and guilt. All right. You know, the idea of anger can manifest itself in different people and in different ways. You know, even if a person passes away at an older age, you know, there can be an anger, but it's not as bad as when, God forbid, a person loses someone, a loved one who's in their 20s. And the anger manifests itself, the pain is one of anger, a feeling of injustice that was done to the person who passed and to the family. You know, we say they didn't deserve it. He or she didn't deserve it. You know, why did it have to why did they have to die so young? You know, why do I deserve it? Okay. You know, it feels wrong. It's not the way it's supposed to be. Those are the words of anger. I feel wrong. I feel cheated. And this is a question that's posed to me all the time. I mean, every day, but when a younger person will pass away, they want to know why. And the why is not a why of a why of study, but a why of anger. Why did it have to happen to my loved one at such a young age? They could have done much more in their life. So let's talk a little bit about this idea of this idea of pain and anger and how maybe we can help people. It's not an easy thing, by the way. So I want to tell you a little bit about a great rabbi. His name was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Now, he is one of the most famous rabbis in Jewish history. He is on a caliber as George Washington. So if you never heard of Yochanan ben Zakkai, it means you need to study more. Because most children today, Jewish kids walking around today, except for those who go to Jewish day school, have never heard of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And it would be sad if you asked a kid today in America if they know who George Washington is. So I want to just tell you who Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Why is he so famous? What was he so famous for, Jackie? You're going back to Hebrew school this Sunday. My Hebrew school. All right. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai lived 2,000 years ago at the time when the Second Temple was destroyed by the Romans. Vespasian conquered Jerusalem, then became the emperor of the Romans, and his son Titus ultimately destroyed Jerusalem and the temple. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was the leader of the Jewish people, at least the spiritual leader, but he also was a political leader as well. And he tried to negotiate, or he didn't even get a chance to negotiate. He advocated for a political solution between the Jews and the Romans. And they were going to make some big concessions to them as long as the Romans do not kill the Jewish people. But unfortunately, the Biryanim, those were the zealots, the young, hot-headed, 20-year-olds, the college student, they said, no, we are going to fight the Romans. They were heroic, but they made a big mistake because that was not the time to be heroic. It was the wrong place and at the wrong time. Anyhow, make a long story really, really short. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai snuck out of Jerusalem, met with Vespasian, and negotiated a much smaller deal. He could not negotiate and save the temple and to save the lives of millions of people, but he was able to get him to agree on various different points. One of them is to allow the rabbinic academies to continue, so teachings of Torah will continue, so on and so forth. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai saw in his own life the worst 9/11 possible for Jewish people, okay? Yet in his own life, he lost his young son. He must have been in his 20s. His son was very young and he died. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai somehow found comfort. He found a way to get out of come out of the ashes of the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem. But when his son died, he couldn't get out of it. He was depressed. He was angry. He had sense of guilt. He had every pain you can only imagine. This is the great Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who you would think would know how to get out of his pain. So what happened was he had 5 illustrious students, all right? And each one of the students came to visit the rabbi to try to cheer him up. They tried to use words that would maybe comfort him and bring some healing in his life. Except for one of them, all four failed miserably. They could not console him. It's a very long reading, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to read the end part. But for now, I'm going to paraphrase what words of consolation they try to use. And each one repeats what the other one did. Here is what the first student does. The first student comes to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. His name is Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he says, you know, Adam lost a son. His son was killed. His name was Abel, right? Abel got killed. And you know what? It seems like he was somehow got out of his depression. You know what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai responded? He says, now you gave me more things to be sad about. So not only am I sad about my son, but now I'm sad about Adam. You didn't help me. I'm more sad. So the next student, his name is Rabbi Joshua. He says, if you look at the book of Job, you ever heard of Job? He went through a lot, Job. He lost all his kids, all of his children. So you know what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says? Well, now you're making me more sad. Not only do I have to be sad about my own loss, I have to be sad about all of the children, the loss of the children of Job. Finally, the third rabbi, Rabbi Yossi, the student, comes before Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He says in the Torah, there's a story about Aaron, the high priest. He's Moses' brother. Do you know that he lost two sons, Elazar and Tamar? And he somehow figured out how to get out of his misery. Again, it's the same response. And finally, the fourth student, his name is Rabbi Shimon. He says, King David lost his son before King Solomon was born. Bathsheba, who was the wife of King David, they had a child, and that baby was a child, not a grown child, but he died. And David was very sad about it, but he came out of his sadness. So again, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, you guys are just making me more sad. You quadrupled my sadness in one day. Here is what the final student did. He did something very different. So I want you to turn to page 106. I believe it's on 106. I want you to look at the part where it has the paragraph Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. Okay, does everybody have it? It's towards the end of this whole big reading. Here it goes. Rabbi Elazar ben Arach entered when Rabbi Yochanan saw him. He told his attendant, grab a set of clothing for me and be prepared to follow me to the bathhouse. For Rabbi Elazar is a great person and I will not be able to hold out in the face of his comforting words. He had a suspicion that this student is smarter than the other ones and he will bring the comfort that he needs at that moment. Bless you. Rabbi Elazar entered, sat before Rabbi Yochanan and told him, let me share a parable. Your situation is similar to that of an individual to whom the king entrusted an article for safekeeping. Each day the man would weep and wail in fear. Woe is to me! When will I emerge unharmed from the safekeeping role? Meaning that the person who is entrusted by the king, it's a valuable whatever he's watching. He wants the time to go by so he doesn't lose it. So he's accountable for it. You, master, also had a son. He was fluent in the Torah and the prophets and scriptures, in the Mishnah, in Halacha, and in the Talmud teachings, and he passed from this world without sin. You should certainly accept consolation, for you have returned your deposit in perfect condition. And Rabbi Yochanan responded, Rabbi Eliezer, my son, you have comforted me in a most humane fashion. It's a very, very important reading because we have a contrast between the four rabbis who not only don't console their teacher, but actually make things worse. And then you have the fifth student. He comes and magically he brings comfort to his teacher, his master. The first rabbi's message missed the whole point of comfort, right? The first thing is, what did they do? They compared their teacher to either Adam, Job,
Winston,
Aaron. Say it again. Huh? Say it again. No. Yeah. So they missed the point. So they were trying to compare him to all those other great people. Can't do that. That's what we explored in the beginning of the lesson. Oh, I see. That's what we explored at the beginning of the lesson, that no two people can express their sadness and their pain in the same way. You can't compare. Just because that person got out of their pain, that doesn't mean you're going to. So they didn't really say much. All they said is, be like that other person. Someone else lost, they got out of it, you'll get out of it. That's not saying much. They didn't offer a path for comfort. They didn't say something unique in the circumstance and in the story of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and his son. They didn't do that. The other rabbi did something very powerful. The other rabbi gave a very powerful idea. He did not make any attempt to console his teacher by comparing him to other people and other circumstances. Instead, he delivered a truth that we are here as a deposit by God. The bodies don't belong to us. Our lives don't belong to us. So we come down into this world without being asked to come in this world, and we're taken. So we come here as a deposit. That's number one. Number two, he brought a path of healing. He said, your son accomplished his mission. It's a very powerful idea. To think about the idea that a person at a young age who passes on, and we're angry about it, to understand that the person fulfilled that which they were here for is something very, very powerful. It's not an easy thing to accept, but it's certainly very, very powerful. If you believe in God, and you believe God gave us a mission, you can believe that God gives us a mission that in our time frame, it's a short period of time. To God, there's no time. God is beyond time and space. So to God, 20 years versus 100 years is no big difference. And by the way, in the scheme of life, if you think about someone who lived in 1500 and someone who lived in 1580, we don't see the difference. At least I don't think it that way. Am I right? But if you think about someone who lived in the year 2000 and someone who lives in 2090, you're talking about generations. Lots of stuff happened in between. That's because of the way we see it in our own little world, in our own little universe. Okay? So Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch, that fifth student, had something powerful to share with his rabbi. And that's why he was able to find solace and comfort in those words. All right, now I want to address the idea of guilt for a moment. What do people say when it comes to guilt, feelings of guilt? So people will say, for example, and I've heard this. I heard my share of guilt, of people feeling guilty. If only I had been better to that person. It means you felt that you weren't good enough with that person. I should have done this, should have done that. Or people, I've heard a very common one. I did not get the chance to ask for forgiveness, proper forgiveness. We didn't make up. We never had a chance to make up. Or I should have visited more. I should have been in touch more. Something along those lines. We should have done things together. There's all of those guilty feelings. And this pretty much can gnaw on a person's conscience, on the bereaved person. So we feel stuck as a result of these ideas. So here is one of the beautiful things that we have to really be able to understand. And again, back to the thing that the soul lives on. If the soul lives on, you get to reconcile, albeit in a different realm. All right, you're not going to buy ice cream or jewelry for the other person. You're not going to buy them physical objects, but you're going to give them gifts. There is a way to do things for them, for the soul, that would make up for the time that you did not spend with them, or the feelings that you didn't reconcile, those guilty feelings. So doing mitzvot, it can be charity, it can be study of Torah, organizing different events, bringing people together to bring whatever it is for a community, to do a lot of things in memory of that person. It's not even in memory, for that person, become the arms and the legs of that person. But I'll tell you something that's very powerful that I do when I officiate at a funeral. Because I know that lots of people, not everybody, when we use the word guilt, not everybody has those guilty feelings. But by and large, people have different feelings of guilt. So I ask people, the bereaved, the people who are in mourning at the cemetery, right at the gravesite. I asked them to stand by the grave before we lower the casket, or sometimes when they lower the casket, to take 60 seconds. And I literally take out my watch, and for 60 seconds, only the bereaved, the loved ones, they stand there and ask for forgiveness. I give them that power. I mean, it's not my power, it's God's power, but I help facilitate the power that you can ask for forgiveness and receive forgiveness back. It's a 60-second form of meditation. I can't tell you how many times people have thanked me for doing that. They could not have, they felt that it was healing and comforting. A very, very powerful idea. So text number 12, page 108. When children say Kaddish for their parents, it is like sending them regards. So the Kaddish is a powerful idea. When they learn a chapter of the Mishnah, which means you're studying the Torah, on their behalf, it is like sending them a letter. And when they fulfill the mitzvot and good deeds for the benefit of their souls, it is like sending them an entire parcel. So that is the idea of how we can move on from feelings of anger and feelings of guilt. All right, now, let me just go through the basic Shiva protocol. People want to know, what are you supposed to do, what you're not supposed to do. So if you look at page 110, you have all these different ideas. I'm just going to go over some of them. And this will lead us to the end of the lesson. Mirrors and pictures in the Shiva house are to remain covered. One of the ideas about covering the mirrors is that it's a moment where we're focused on the spiritual side of the loved one. So mirrors, when we look in the mirrors, we're looking how disheveled we are. Hey, we got to fix ourselves up. So we go back to our physical reality. The whole Shiva experience has to be one of that's more uplifting and more mystical, even, and more spiritual. So that's why it's important to have your mirrors covered in the home. Remain in the house of the mourning. So it's good to remain there for 7 days. Another idea is to continue wearing the garments that was worn as an act of mourning. That's typically the shirt that you tore, keep that on. We sit in low stools. We forego the comforts of leather shoes. We don't shave our beards. We refrain from marital intimacy. We avoid listening to music, abstain from work or business, and avoid the study of Torah even. So these are things that we do in order for us to be able to be focused and in tune with our loved one and with our own selves, and being able to connect in that spiritual sense. Now, it is a great mitzvah to console a person that passes away. Let's read what that mitzvah is all about. Page number 13. So if we come as visitors, it's important. Here's what it says here. Text 13. The sages obligated us to visit the sick and console the mourners. These are deeds of kindness that one carries in person and have no limit. That means charity has a limit. You can't give all your money away. But kindness of visiting, people who are mourning for the loved one, there's no limit. Go as many as you can. Although these are rabbinic ordinances, they fall under the purview of biblical commandment to love your fellow as yourself. So if a person thinks, should I go? Should I not go to the Shiva? Go. All right. Side on the side of going, because, nobody, if they tell you we're busy or whatever, they're not going to see you as, in a negative light. They'll actually see this as a nice idea. Yeah. Most people want that. Shouldn't be, exactly. Loneliness is terrible. Exactly. So the first principle of comforting a bereaved is just simply being there for that person. So the presence in this sense, time in and of itself is comforting. Okay, let's read text number 14, page 112. The reward for visiting the home of the mourner is for the silence. That's the idea of silence. The main reward for comforting the bereaved is for moments of silence. The empathy expressed during these moments of voiceless commiseration is too powerful. So when we're sitting there, just being there for them is very, very powerful. Let's read text number 112. The comforters may not say anything until the mourner opens up the conversation. It's very important that we wait for the mourner to open up the conversation, just to see which direction they want to go to. So you don't walk in, hey buddy, what's doing? You have to be very careful. A person should also be careful about lightening the mood. So you know what, people do say jokes and all that, and that's fine. But there has to be a balance, and you have to really be sensitive that maybe it's not the right time. And you want to be more more cautious, just don't do it unless the mourner is doing it themselves. Don't try to philosophize, say, oh, they lived on. You don't have to philosophize. Nobody needs your philosophy at that point. All right. There are different phrases that a person has to be careful. For example, where were you when he died? I mean, is this like when President Kennedy? People do that. I mean, this is not like when President Kennedy, which was a sad day in America. Where were you at that moment? Did she die from cancer or the chemo? These are insensitive questions that I've heard, by the way. Similar. Did you know in advance or was it sudden? What's the difference? Did he have life insurance? What's another one that some people say, and this you have to be careful. God takes the good ones. You have to be careful with that one. It could be a good thing. Huh? Only the good die young. So I don't know if it's comforting and healing. You have to be careful. It doesn't help because the person's gone. So I don't want that. All right. Anyhow, those are things that we have to be very, very careful of. What's important is to speak about their legacy, to speak about their life and to speak about the things that they desired and, the good things. Those are important things, the goodness of their life. Those are very, very powerful ideas that bring a lot of comfort to a mourner. All right, let's read the Midrash on page 112, reading number 16. Here it goes. The final word regarding a person is that the people proclaiming his deeds, commenting so-and-so was upright, so-and-so was God-fearing. When a person departs the world, God says to the ministering angels, see what people are saying about him. If they say that he had been upright and God-fearing, his soul immediately ascends to paradise. So what it's saying is that we have power to be able to help the soul to go to its better place by saying good things about them in their life. I think we made it actually 10 minutes early. This is the lesson, or lesson number 3 in a nutshell. What I'd like to do is, I'd like to ask Jackie to give us her thesis on life. It's going to take about 2 hours. No, I'm just kidding. We're going to ask if anybody wants to share an idea. You can unmute yourself, question, a complaint, compliment, happy Purim, anything. Anybody want to say anything?
Thank you.
All right, so basically, yeah. Yeah. So Jack is pretty much echoing a lot of the things that we discussed in our class, but it's of any time, and that's pretty much why we're doing this. During COVID is probably the time that we should be talking about these ideas, because I think lots of people know people who have passed on from COVID and other things as well. It's been a difficult time, and unfortunately. Anybody else have anything to say?
Just want to thank you. Difficult subjects. Always wondered about the protocol proper, the teachings that we have. This is excellent. I didn't know about the rabbi trying to make a deal with the Romans, but the zealots kept that from happening. That's history that I thank you for that.
Yeah. By the way, regarding that piece of history, that part of history is brought up in the last 50 years of Israel's interesting relationship with the Palestinians, because those who are in favor of giving away the whole of Israel, the peaceniks, which is not a good idea, they actually use Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai as an example of how things should be done. The reason they're wrong is because there were two different times with two different circumstances. Sometimes Israel can can negotiate out of strength. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was not in a position of negotiating with much strength. He did not have much strength. He found favor in the eyes of Vespasian, and it was a sad time, but he did what he did. But yeah, that is a very famous piece of history for Judaism. Yeah, it's a very sad story, by the way, because the zealots, these young kids, what they did was they burnt down all the storehouses of food,
Oh,
so they
it's
no
awful.
longer had food to eat.